Thimali, thank you so much again. We're on the home run here, which I'm a bit sad to say. For those of you who haven't met Thimali yet, she is the series producer of my favourite podcast, Mothers of Invention. She's one of the co-hosts and she's kick-ass and I love her. And I've only ever met her on Zoom, which is so dry. I'm looking forward to a socially distanced drink when we've closed this trilogy.
Totally.
So tell me, you're in New York. How is all the election excitement going?
Do you know what, Stella? I really believe in our young people. They are honestly just the smartest, most compassionate people I meet in my work. I'm in constant awe of them. So that is where all my belief is.
All the youth activists.
Yeah.
Guys, just so you know, we're trying to figure out what constitutes being a youth activist, where the age cutoff is. As an activist, pride myself on being an activist. I don't think I'm a youth activist anymore. That's kind of, I'm assuming. We're going to find out by the end of this trilogy.
Yeah. Comment below.
Yeah, I want to know. You guys tell us, what's the cutoff age? I couldn't agree more with you. It is the hope that we have, right, is in tomorrow's voters, essentially, to really pull it out of the bag this time around.
They're busy bees. And let's face it, in a pre-digital world, we probably got up to a lot worse in our art school days.
Yeah.
So actually, the youth climate movement are doing an amazing job looking at how to sustain over long periods of time using self-care, because they know they have to be in this movement for a long time.
Yeah.
This season, Mary, Maeve and I have been asking every guest we featured on the show how they take care of themselves through their very emotionally challenging work. You know, because life is very hectic and overwhelming, and particularly so right now.
No, but I mean, I think that's really important. I think when you're an activist and when you're a woman activist and you're trying to fight for the planet, it's a pretty kind of unrewarding job, you know, sadly. So I think how we overcome that sense of just being disheartened or sort of losing the faith that we can all come together and create this change. I think it's a really important question, you know, how we keep bright, how we keep inspired and you know, use that to be powerful.
Absolutely. What do you feel you've learnt the most about over the course of this year? I
couldn't put it in priorities, it's just too much. But I mean, I know from a personal point of view, you know, I've always known that health and love are kind of the most important things, because without that you have nothing. I think for me as a fashion designer, first and foremost, an activist fashion designer, I've been really kind of re-inspired about what I do and why I do it. You know, I don't think coming out of COVID-19 and into fashion feels particularly important, and I feel proud that I'm an alternative coming out of this, that I have really powerful beliefs and stand for something that I think is important and to represent in my industry, one of the most harmful to the planet, sadly. Coming out of it, I've gotten very kind of, I've kind of rewritten a manifesto. I've gotten really inspired creatively. I've found that creativity is such a great thing to come out of this and can be used so powerfully. And you're talking about climate change, art and creativity and fashion and music and poetry and dance and film. You know, these are things that you can really use as a tool to tell a story that can inspire change. I've come out of it feeling inspired and like I'm going to fight for this.
Oh my God, I love you, Stella. You have been in the game for a really long time, and you've had to do that amongst lots of scrutiny. First with vegetarianism, and then going into environmental work, and then climate work, and of course the end of that scale for us, at least, is climate justice, which is the great unifier, is the kind of the way that we talk about it, because it affects everybody. Like, it doesn't care about your race, it doesn't care about your gender, it doesn't care about your income level or your level of, you know, physical ability. It's coming for all of us. So as much as it's the thing that could negatively affect us, it's also the thing we can all get behind and like feel community and be a part of something and get excited about being together in a fight, you know, whilst the world is so segregated on so many issues right now.
Yeah, during the lockdown and everything, I really just reached out to so many friends. I felt really like I wanted to reconnect with people, you know, because you get so busy and kind of down your little rabbit hole, and I wanted to really just reach out to my community of loved ones, and I think that's been really inspiring. And I think what you ladies have invented at Mothers of Invention is a community, you know, and I think it's been really beautiful to listen to and to watch and just, be part of that. I feel very proud that we've worked on things together in this period.
Yeah,
that kind of ignited it. You know, I've wanted to work with you guys for so long, and it took COVID for me to be like, right, let's fucking talk and do this, you know. So there's good stuff that's come out of this, as well as obviously all of the tragedy.
Women are very good at finding a way out of the fire, dancing their way out of the fire, I would say.
Yeah. No, another thing is working with the diversity that you ladies champion. And I think having diverse female voices has been such a privilege for me to have on the Stella McCartney platform, to really kind of open up that conversation and highlight the importance of that. You know, I think we can forget it, or we can not be aware of it, and just bringing that to the attention of everyone, I think, is critical. And I feel very, very proud to have done that with you ladies.
Oh, the love is reciprocated. On that beautiful note, Stella, we've heard from our Indigenous lawyer, Tara Hausker, who was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And we've heard from our amazing ocean scientist, Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, and about her new book. And today, my pal and co-host on this podcast, Maeve Higgins, is going to be talking to the brilliant climate writer, Mary Heglar, who is one of my dear friends too. And actually, you can hear more about Mary in one of my favourite mini-sodes this season, where she and I take a walk through a New York City park together.
Definitely. I can't wait to hear Mary talk. She sounds like a true icon, really. I'm excited that she's part of this. I feel really, really excited for everyone to hear what she's got to say as well.
I did want to say that this election matters to every human being on earth, every single one of us, no matter what your political leaning. So if you are lucky enough to have a vote in the US, please, 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 please use it to guarantee the best possible outcomes for a climate safe future for everyone all over the planet.
One thing to just pause on is, you know, you've got a vote, you have one, and that doesn't happen everywhere in the world. So, you know, use it, be proud of it, because people fought for your vote. So get out there and get up off your ass and make the right choice for your future.
Right on, Stella.
Mary Heglar, hello, hi, it's so good to see you.
Hello, it's good to see you too.
How are you doing? I know it's a weird question given our current circumstances.
I'm 2020. I think that's going to be my new answer from now on until December.
And then it's going to be 2021. Everything's going to be magically changed around.
No, it won't. No, it won't.
Where were you when the pandemic struck?
I was in London at the Doc Society's Climate Story Lab event. And it was, of course, my first time in London, my first time in Europe. I had these plans to go to Paris. That got canceled before I even left. But when I went to London, I was like, how bad can it get in a week? Now we know the answer to that question. It can get really, really, really bad.
You're back in New York now. This is where you live, right?
Yeah. So I've been back here ever since. Have not left New York since March.
I feel like New Yorkers are caring for each other a little bit more than usual, and there's a sort of a gentleness to the city at the moment. I don't know if you're finding that.
I'm finding that, and I'm also not finding that. I think people turn different sorts of ways when they're pushed to their edge. Sometimes people get kinder. Sometimes people get rougher. And with COVID, I think like people were pushed a little further to their brink. It wasn't like, you know, Hurricane Sandy, which felt like a way more isolated, smaller event than COVID. Mm-hmm. We were put in a position where we really were told to be afraid of one another and to stay away from one another physically. I think what brought us back together more was the protests. But after the protests, people, I think, became gentler. But then again, the reason we became gentler is because the police became rougher. So I think there's some of both. And then also thinking about like the situation with Amy Cooper in Central Park, which is just like one of many such incidents that just happened to be the one we know about, the one that was caught on tape. And honestly, what frustrated me the most about that was that the discourse leading up to it was, if I'm wearing a mask, that means I care about you. Amy Cooper was wearing a mask, and that didn't change anything.
No, it really didn't. She was still very much able to call the police and make a false report. Yeah, a real multitasker.
Yeah. I mean, you know, when it's second nature, it's second nature.
To me, you're this awesome writer. I read everything that you write.
Aww.
I really do. Like, your voice is so strong and it really cuts through the noise. You're the co-host of the climate podcast Hot Take, and along with that, the Hot Take newsletter, which everybody should sign up to. We both live in New York, but I grew up in rural Ireland, and I think that's how I got my connection to nature at the start. I'm from an island, so I'm near the sea, and it's also rural and farming, so it's near other ecosystems as well. Where did you grow up, and how did that connect you to, you know, people and nature around you?
I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and rural Mississippi. So, I mean, Birmingham's a legit city, but it's not as concrete and dense as New York by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know if I could even say when I formed my bond with nature, because I think that just happened before I had memory. But some of my favorite memories when I was really, really little was like hanging out with my great aunts and uncles and like picking like fruit off of trees and pecans off the ground, because I was close to the ground, so that was my job.
Get the tiny one to do the lowdown.
Exactly. It's like, my knees aren't doing all that. You get it. There was a lot of that, but also I don't feel like it was a bond that broke when I moved to New York. And I don't think it's a bond that you don't have if you grow up in a place like New York, because you're still existing in nature. Like, I'm in my apartment right now, but I'm still in nature because, like, look at this. This is air. All of this, that's natural. I'm also, like, inside a human body, which is nature. Having a pet, that is nature. Eating vegetables, that is nature. So, like, I think, you know, it's always part of us. I think the problem is just that mostly we often think of nature as being something separate from ourselves and not something that is a part of us.
Wow, that's beautiful, because I definitely fall into that trap, and I sometimes think like, I'm going to go into nature now. It's not like, where am I going? I suppose what I mean is like a park or to the sea. But you're so right. And you know what I got? I got a tomato plant from the producer, because I have this incorrect vision that like the park is nature and my home is like a refrigerator. Like, you know, I don't know. So our producer Thimali gave me a tomato plant, which I've been trying to keep alive, and it's working.
Good for you.
You know, we both co-host these climate focused podcasts, and we both write on the subject. And like Mothers of Invention, your podcast just returned with a new season. Amy Westervelt, I knew her from the Drilled podcast. Hot Take is known for calling out media coverage of climate.
Yeah.
So can you tell Stella Vision viewers about the podcast and what Hot Take taught you about climate communication?
Oh my God, it taught me so much. So I'll try to narrow it down. I learned about Amy through the Drill podcast too, which everyone should be listening to.
Yeah, it's great.
And it is.
She does not pull any punches. Like, I really
doesn't.
appreciate how straightforward she is. And yeah, she calls corporations and people out, and it's great work.
One of the things she does on there that I love the most is that she like calls out the fossil fuel industry's propaganda and the ways that they've weaponized communications and manipulation just really expertly. And so Hot Take kind of picks up on the other side of that in terms of like, well, how are the rest of us telling this story? How is the media telling this story, right? Kind of like, we hear all the time that we have the solutions to climate change, we just don't have the political will. Well, political will is built in the media. So somebody needs to be looking at the media and seeing how the story is being told, where the marks are being missed, where it's being done well, because we do often talk about like, oh my God, I love this story. And so Amy and I became friends last summer. We sort of started talking about doing a podcast shortly after, by that fall. And Amy was like, I want to do like a climate news podcast. And I was like, what if it was media criticism, but for climate? And also, can I have fun? Can I curse? Can I tell dad jokes? Can we have fun with this thing? The absurdities are so absurd, you have to laugh. And we do a lot of laughing on our show.
You do,
yeah. We kind of felt like, you know, we could have this space where people who write about and communicate about climate change could come on the show as guests. Climate is a big area, and there's a lot of like ways to talk about it, and the people who do the talking about it don't often get to talk to each other. So we wanted to kind of like create that space as well, and everybody can kind of like relate to the media. It's far more likely that you're going to read an article than you're going to read a report. So we felt like that made it more accessible, and it was kind of like what we were texting about anyway. About like, oh my God, did you see this article? It sucks. Did you see this article? It's great. How did they not include climate in this story? Right? That sort of thing. Yeah, we've been having so much fun with it. And what I've learned about it, the climate story has changed very, very fast in the past handful of years, in the past Trump years. At the end of 2018, or 2019 rather, we did a year in review for every year of the Trump presidency. That was how we started the episode. And we had no idea until we did that how much things had changed. Like our first episode was 2016 to 2017. We combined the 2 years because there was so little coverage. And then by the time we got to 2019 in review, we recorded for like 4 hours.
I know the episode is like 2 hours long. It's wild. It's changing at such a fast pace.
Right.
And just as you were saying there about like being careful about, you know, how we communicate climate. Yes, the two of us are on climate podcasts, but also everybody is on social media. So it's on all of us to tell these stories better and to talk to our family and friends. Because like, they're probably going to listen to, you know, their sister or their aunt more than they're going to, as you said, read a scientific report or even read like a long form piece of reported journalism.
We still believe, you know, those reports are super important. Like kind of what we found when we were doing those year in reviews episodes was that the thing that changed the conversation the most was the 2018 IPCC report. The one that said we had, I believe it was 12 years.
12 years.
That scared people to death. And it was the most pointed in a UN report had ever been about climate change. It put it into terms that were too stark to ignore and very accessible. And people took that and like ran with it. And finally we saw Sunrise sitting in on Nancy Pelosi's office. We saw just like massive change in the way that people talked about it. Yeah, the narrative has shifted dramatically. There's still a long way to go, we feel. And there's a lot of trends that we're keeping our eyes on and looking out for, but it is changing very fast.
And as you say, it moves so quickly. That's why it's really great to have, you know, a platform here, like the way we can talk on Instagram and catch you up. And also the newsletter that you guys launched, it's just called the Hot Take newsletter. And it's a straightforward way of keeping up, but there's also this kind of humor. And as you said, yes, the IPCC report is written very accessibly and it's really easy to understand. And I'm really grateful for the work they did there. But there's no dad jokes and there's no swearing. So
that's our niche. That's our little territory. The newsletter came out of a couple of different places. One, I was frustrated looking for articles to talk about on the podcast. The way I was able to keep up with the best climate writing was through Twitter. So if I went to Apple News, the climate change section was always very sparse. There would always be like gaping holes where I know there was like a blockbuster article on this. They don't have it listed. Google News, the same sort of thing. It was very sparse. They didn't know how to populate it very well. Big newspapers kind of hide their climate section. You have to dig for it. And then if they have a newsletter, it's just their coverage, right? So the New York Times does have a climate newsletter, but it's all New York Times coverage. You don't get like, what is Vice saying? What is Vox saying? What is New York Magazine saying? If you wanted to find all of that, that's not easy to find. And people don't want to be on Twitter all the time.
It hurts.
It can. It definitely can. So when we started to launch the newsletter, I was like, we're going to have that feature. And initially that was it. And then we were like, but we have a lot to say. We can't say it all in the podcast every week. Also, it's a way to keep us off of Twitter. So instead of writing a Twitter thread, we write like a 3-paragraph newsletter story instead. And also allows the conversation to reach people who don't want to be on Twitter. Everyone does not want to be there.
No, and only a small percentage of the population are even there in the first place.
Exactly.
Right? So I love what you're doing with these other mediums. And as you said, like it's a way to list what's out there. It's informative. But I think what first drew me to your work was the kind of passion and the emotiveness of your writing, backed up by facts, if that's where you're coming from. But what was really beautiful to me was the storytelling. I'd love if we could share a piece that you wrote. This came out in the Huffington Post in June. Mary, would you read something from that, like just a short extract so that the viewers can get a taste? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Climate change takes any problem you already had, any threat you were already under, and multiplies it. When you take a population that has lived in chronic crisis, under constant threat for generations, from police violence to housing discrimination to general disenfranchisement, and add yet another threat, that's not just a recipe for catastrophe. With the climate crisis itself, the storms and the temperatures, it's not so much that the game is rigged, it's the playing field. Climate change is not the great equalizer. It is the great multiplier. So it's not just time to talk about climate. It's time to talk about it as the Black issue it is. It's time to stop whitewashing it. In other words, it's time to stop all lives mattering the climate crisis.
Wow, that's so powerful. You've always held space for these issues that have troubled the climate movement for a long time. You know, a climate movement that excludes Black and brown people, which makes no sense considering the huge effects.
Right.
But this particular piece, what prompted it for you?
So I was moved to write this because what's frustrating me a lot, especially at the time, was this was late May, early June, when the Black Lives Matter protests were really picking up steam here. And a lot of folks in the climate space were like, now is not the time to talk about climate because we need to be standing with Black Lives Matter. And as a Black climate activist, that was kind of like, I'm sorry, who did you think I was here for to begin with? Climate change is about Black people. Like, did you think I was here to save white people? Like, no, I was here to save myself, and I am Black. So, like, I think it's now time to just connect those dots. Another thing that I talk about in that article is that the historic way that the climate community, or the environmental, I should say, community, has reached out to the Black community has been like, oh, you're worried about police violence? You need to be worried about polar bears instead. Right, and sort of creating this false dichotomy as opposed to connecting it to the ways that this affects Black people's lives. Because it does, it absolutely does. And Black people are smart enough to understand and hold space for that, because this idea of like, oh, well, you're worried about that, so we won't trouble you with this right now, doesn't make sense when you've always had to deal with compounding crises. So we've never not been able to look at the light bill and the phone bill at the same time because they're coming out of the same account.
I know what you mean. I also really love the metaphor in that piece about it's not the game, it's the playing field that's uneven. And when you think about that, we're like, oh my God. So you think that you're running in a straight line with everybody else, but no, there's holes in the ground, there's hurdles, there's like people snatching at your feet. Like, it's so terrifying.
Well, it's just that, like, the game has always been rigged for Black people, but now, like, the ground that we stand on is rippling and earthquaking and sinking and flooding, right? So, like, now what?
No, for sure. And that's why I think it's so cool to see the movement for Black lives also being a movement for climate and people not worrying about the, you know, no, we need to set that aside and set, you know, thanks to leadership from you and leadership from people in the Black Lives Matter movement. At the heart of what we try and do at Mothers of Invention is to understand that. And climate has to be a movement that's for immigrants, that's for, you know, Indigenous people. And I've learned a lot from the guests that we've had. We had this amazing guest on. She's a Brazilian Indigenous activist, Dayara Tucano. She's down, you know, in the Amazon with the Tucano people and other Indigenous communities. And we also spoke to Ursula Rakova of the Catharsis Islands. She is moving her people. Like, she has to move her people. There's not a, how are we going to protect the land? It's like, no, it's too late, sadly. So we need to move our people. These are communities that are on the front lines, right, of climate issues, and people that, like, we need to learn from, even if it's for selfish reasons, because it's coming for everybody.
Yeah. And I just want to say that I love the work that y'all are doing at Mothers of Invention. You guys do really bring such a great global perspective to all of it, and talking to people who are implementing the solutions.
I think that we're lucky because, as you know, my co-host is Mary Robinson, who was the UN Human Rights Commission. Like, she has held incredibly powerful positions, and so we're privileged in that way to have this reach and to have the resources to try and talk to people, whether they be leaders in the global south, like political leaders. You know, we have a production team, Mary, who can find these women who are doing frontline work. So I think we're very, very lucky to be able to do that. And to, as you said, like, joining the dots, which is, like, it's so crazy to me that we can speak to somebody who's literally doing work in the Amazon in Brazil, and she's talking about how a over-the-top president is, like, really going after environmental rights, and not to directly compare Bolsonaro with Trump, but look at the rollbacks that we've been facing here. So, like, to see these kind of scouts ahead in the future, and then to also look back to the past and see the mistakes. Last month, television viewers met the wonderful Dr. Ayana Johnson, and her book, The one she's edited is called All We Can Save. And you have an essay in that book. It's called Home is Always Worth It. And you write really candidly about how unnerving it can be, right? To kind of sit in this space we're in now where the future is very uncertain. And like, I find that a frightening reality to confront. So I wondered what it was like for you to write from this very personal place.
Yeah, I always write from a really personal place. And I do that because one, my first audience is always me. So I write because I've got something I'm wanting to work through. And so there's a catharsis in it for me to like get clear on my ideas. And so I'm honestly not even thinking about who I want to convince of what while I'm writing. It's just about like healing myself. I struggle when I can't express something well. So honestly, a lot of my essays are a result of someone asking me a question and I wasn't satisfied with my answer. And so I think of a comeback later on and then I write an essay. So, but this piece came out of last year. There was an essay published in the New Yorker. It was by a man named Jonathan Franzen, and its general idea was, what if we stop pretending that climate change could be solved? What I took from it was basically, why don't we just give up on climate change and fix what we can, like democracy or something like that. And I felt like that was a major abdication of responsibility. And so I was like, that's not the answer. But then I saw a lot of people arguing back with that, being like, no, we can still fix this. And being like, no, girl, we're at 1.1 degrees of warming. Like, there is some serious suffering baked in now. Both of these are two sides of the same coin, really. And so I wanted to write something about like the space in the middle, because we don't have to go to either side. Like, there's no perfect world either way. So like both of those ideas kind of rest on this notion of a perfect world where like, if it's not going to be perfect, I don't want to do it and I give up. Or yes, it can still be perfect. Let's work to make it perfect. And it's like, I've never known a perfect world in my life. Yeah. And I never will. And neither will you. And it's time to like get used to that.
I agree. And I think that a lot of times it's easy to shut people down for being Pollyanna-ish. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like for being like, guys, it's going to be fine. We just need to do this. And you don't do that. You're extremely honest with yourself and with others about, you know, what is maybe possible and then what to do, you know. But as you say, it's like, I'm so into what you said about that you write to figure out like what you feel and think, and right to heal yourself, as opposed to this prescriptive like kind of macho style of like, this is what you need to do.
Right. I don't often know where I'm going until I get there, which makes it difficult to pitch essays, honestly, because the editor is like, where are you going with it? I'm like, I don't know.
I'm very interested to find out myself, and I will be back to you in 3 weeks' time.
Exactly.
How does it feel then for all of these eyes to be on your work and your feelings and your emotions?
Every time I publish something, I kind of feel like nobody's going to read this. And if I didn't think that, I don't think I would be able to publish it. I don't think about it very much.
What I'm taking from what you're saying, Mary, is like, concern yourself with the work, concern yourself with the trip of getting where you're going, and don't worry about the impact, and don't worry about if people are paying attention, if they're going to like you more or not like you more. Yeah. And this could be going to a march, this could be changing the way you eat or not traveling as much, or some personal action, changing where you bank, and not being too concerned with the result.
One of the questions I get a lot is, do you think we're going to win? Basically, some variation on like, do you think we're going to make it? And my answer to that is that like, I don't know, but I don't think it's a useful question. I think the useful question is, who do you want to be? No matter where we go, no matter who wins what election, who runs for what election, who do you want to be? And that shouldn't change no matter what happens in the rest of the world. I guess that's what I'm more focused on, as opposed to like, yeah, if I sat down and thought about the fact that there are like 40-something thousand people following me on Twitter and reading my dumb tweets about my cat, like that would probably freak me out, but I don't think about it much.
You were just the writer in resident at Columbia University's Earth Institute, and you taught a seminar about personal essays and climate. So what was that like, working with young students? How was it?
Yeah, they were mostly grad students. I'm always struck by their heightened sense of emotional intelligence. And I think that's why they also are so concerned about climate change, not just as a technical problem, but as a justice issue. They were really willing to dig in ways that, like, I don't think I was capable of thinking of at that age, right? Like the way that they cared for each other in that space, and like went willingly into the emotionality of it and wanting to talk about it as an issue that frightened them, encouraged them, and just was present all throughout their lives, right? Like I think we are so used to talking about climate change as this siloed scientific thing, and they don't see it that way at all. It is extraordinarily personal to them. And so our conversations were really emotional and vulnerable, especially after COVID happened and everybody had to go virtual. We still had our time together, and like a lot of it was really sad and morose, but you could tell that they got something out of just being together and being able to be vulnerable, and sometimes even just to sit in the silent sadness was healing for them. I think what they don't enjoy is the gaslighting that we often get of like, no, it's okay. It's like, no, but it's not.
As you said, they know better. This has been their whole lives. These young people are so inspiring to me, and that is such bravery, right? To say that it's not okay. We recently handed over the mic to these young people who were in the climate movement for our youth takeover episode, which actually like makes me feel, even saying like, Mary, there was a youth takeover episode. Just like, oh my God.
Nah, we're not kids anymore.
As soon as you even say those words, it's like, put on your slippers. And, yeah. But one of the things, like, of course, occupying their mind was, you know, the US presidential elections. Do you have a message for people before this election?
It's not one that I can afford to sit out. I don't think our country can afford to sit this out. We're too powerful. We have too many nukes. We have too big of an army, too big of a carbon footprint, that what happens here, I don't like it, but it does have huge consequences for what happens to this planet. And what happens in this next 4 years, we won't be able to undo in any meaningful amount of short-term history.
The day this is going out, it's the last day you can register to vote in some states. So make sure that you're registered if you're able to vote. A lot of us can't, but if you can, then please do, obviously.
And if you moved, make sure that you re-register, which I just learned.
Mary, it's been so much fun to chat with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us television viewers where to find you online, the best places, your favorite places?
My favorite place is definitely my newsletter, because it keeps me off of Twitter. You can find our podcast newsletter, all that stuff, at our website, which is hottakepod.com. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Mary Heglar, Heglar, and I'm on Instagram under the same handle, mary.heglar.
You're the best. It's been so much fun to chat with you. Thanks for joining us. Everyone, don't forget you can hear more important and inspiring climate justice women on our podcast, Mothers of Invention, which you can find on the usual podcast platforms, or look for @Mothers Invent on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Thank you.